and welcome back to UWP on Xbox One.
Hello! In this session, we're going to be talking about the visual differences between UWP on desktop and the UWP app that's running on the Xbox One. So, if we have a look at this particular slide, what we're showing here is the TV safe area and the differences between the display of the same UWP application running on a PC in tablet mode and on Xbox One.
So this is what we saw in the overview, where we have these white things along the edge.
Absolutely.
That's that area.
So if we kind of focus on the PC, as I mentioned, I switched it into tablet mode, so it's full screen.
Okay.
Now we have the start bar across the bottom, but what we really notice is Hello World is a certain size and is docked firmly to the top left-hand side of the window.
Yeah.
If we then look across at the Xbox One, we first and foremost notice the striking white border all around the outside.
Yeah.
But we also notice that Hello World is actually larger. So these two screen resolutions are actually identical.
Okay.
So Hello World has been scaled up.
I see.
And that's one of the first things to note is that by default, if we run a UWP application on the Xbox One, the UI is scaled to 100%.
Got it. And so that's a little bit different than Zoom. It's actually individual objects are scaled, and so everything's twice as large and then rearranged as necessary.
Correct. And we also have this margin around the outside. Now, why do we have this margin?
Well, all TVs are not created equally. That is
pretty
the
much
biggest
the
problem.
truth. So fundamentally, that margin is there to ensure that all of the rich content that you're developing and you intend for the user to be able to view is going to be displayed across the entire set of TVs to which the Xbox One can connect. That's fundamentally what it's there. But obviously, this is pretty jarring, having this white border around the outside. So we're going to talk about a few strategies for dealing with that in a moment.
Now, XAML developers, they already know that whenever they lay out their UI, they're really laying out things not in pixels, but in effective pixels. These are calculated pixels so you don't have to think, what's my resolution, what's my scale factor? They can go ahead and build that out.
Absolutely.
And so we have this to lay over so we can see that whenever you're building an application intended for Xbox One, you have a reliable size that you're building to, but you also have a reliable kind of gutter where this TV safe area is.
Absolutely. So, predictably, your left and right margins are going to be 48 EPX.
Predictably, that's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
And your top and bottom margins are going to be 27 pixels. That leaves us, which is kind of interesting, with 540p. So 540 EPX in the middle. Now, why do we have 540? It's because we're scale factor 2.
That's right. And why is it scaled at 200%? Because remember, we're building this for an Xbox, and an Xbox is 10 feet away. Exactly.
And so what they've done in the infrastructure for us is they've made the assumption that if you've built one app to run across all of these devices, we're going to scale it up by a factor of 2 on the Xbox One to make it legible at the 10-foot experience. Now, you don't actually have to accept these, and we'll come to this in a moment. You can also design exclusively for the 10-foot experience, in which case you can reset all of this and turn this off.
Nice. Okay, so I also have, let's look at this slide. So this is a standard layout. I could see this, right? And you can see there are those TV safe gutters over on the side at 48 pixels, just like we would expect, and 27. And I've got everything laid out. But it's a little annoying to me here to have all of that. And honestly, when I use really nice apps on Xbox, I never see this, Darren.
Yeah, you don't see this, and that's because as a designer and developer of the application, you want to give the best possible experience. And that means for those people that have a system that is capable of showing content in these gutters, or the margins, I should say, we want to extend our content out there.
Yeah.
But we can't fall into the trap of putting essential content out there. If we have important read this in the bottom margin and half the people can't see it.
That's where the tornado warning is.
Yeah, exactly. That's your marquee, get to the seller now. So we want to be able to work out how we can leverage those things to give the right aesthetic, and what are the strategies to do that.
Yeah, and this slide is great because it shows you exactly all of the space that you have as well, and that it's reliable. So, a lot of developers, they'll use visual states to rearrange as necessary, and some developers will use dedicated views. If you do have a dedicated view, you can set it right to this. You can right inside Visual Studio, and it constrains for you. Now, here we go. This is that same application, and we've moved it out some magical way, and at least it's filled the space.
Yes, so we've done a few things here. We've extended our colors so they go all the way to the edge of the screen into the margins, and that gives us that extended experience. We haven't moved essential content into those areas, but one of the key things, if you look at the bottom of this particular UI, we can see that the grid view elements have been extended down into that margin. That allows us to do kind of hinting to illustrate that there is additional content below there.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that kind of gives you that extended experience. If we look at the hamburger menu and the items on the left-hand side, we can see that the color space for that has extended into the top, bottom, and left margins. Again, giving us that idea that the application is actually filling the available space, but we've ensured that there is sufficient padding around the edges of those to make sure that all of the content is within the TV safe area.
So you have a top-of-the-line TV. You'll see all of this. In my old 1980s TV, I'll see all the content that's necessary.
Yeah.
And we both will have a good experience because you'll play to both. Is this pretty difficult to do? Maybe we should pull up Visual Studio and see just how to do it.
It seems like a good idea. So let's go to Visual Studio. So here's a project I created earlier because nobody really wants to see me write all of this. And so first and foremost, let's run the application on the Xbox and see what it looks like out of the box.
Okay.
So this is a very simple application. It has a title and it has a grid view. We're actually creating the data automatically.
This is the Extend UI sample.
It is. I wonder what we're going to do with it.
Right.
So one of the first things we notice is, as we start up the application, we have this mouse cursor. And so this is being controlled with the left stick of the Xbox controller.
And by default, every app gets the mouse cursor.
Yeah, the idea being that a unmodified desktop application would now run because it hasn't had to deal with any custom focus capability. I can use the A button to select objects. I can use the right joystick to actually scroll the grid view up and down.
Sure.
But of course, we haven't done much to optimize the experience for this. Yeah. So we have our green margin around the outside. Our content doesn't extend into any of the areas. And so effectively, we've letterboxed our UI. And that's probably not the best experience.
And I'd like to use the D-pad instead to be able to navigate like a normal app.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, let's look at how we can switch over from this mouse mode into the standard Xbox navigation. So let's stop the app and come back to my application. So here we are in Visual Studio again. We've opened up the app.xaml.cs and we're actually in the constructor for the application. Okay. I have this line here which I'm going to uncomment, and that's going to change the requires pointer mode from auto, which is the default, to when requested. Now that means that unless a particular control or the application itself requests pointer mode, it's going to revert back to standard navigation mode where you use left, right, up, and down to move your focus around.
Now you're doing this in the application, so this is a global setting, but you can do it on individual pages or even individual controls.
Yes, indeed. So you could turn around and say, for example, if we had a hypothetical application where we might have a map control. When we have focus on the map control, we might want to then move pointer mode on so we can scroll the map around.
Yeah.
That's much more convenient than using left, right, up, and down as an example.
All right, so you've uncommented that out. Is that all you have to do?
That's all we have to do. So if we run this back up, we can see on the application that now we no longer have the mouse cursor. And now if I move my joystick left and right, now focus moves around. And you can see how it automatically scrolls to keep the selected item in view and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's nice.
The right stick no longer scrolls.
No matter what you do.
No matter what we do.
Now what about you were using the triggers?
Yeah, so now if I use the right trigger, then it moves down a page. If I use the left trigger, it moves up a page.
Oh, I see.
So that's the standard for quickly moving through our items. So we've got a more traditional Xbox navigation experience now.
That's right, yeah.
So that's our first step towards making this a little bit better for the Xbox.
All right, so I see the TV safe area. Walk me through on how I can start taking advantage of that space too. Okay,
so let's stop this application and come back to Visual Studio. So we're back in Visual Studio again, so let's take a look at the main page. So if I look at my main page, what we have is the page and we have the background is green. So that's how we got the green border appearing around our application.
So the page always goes to the edge.
Exactly. Then we have our grid. That is where the margin is being set to push it in by 48 and 27.
Okay.
48 on the sides, 27 on the top and bottom. This is our standard background theme
And not
brush.
by you.
Not by me, it's by the
Xbox.
system.
Okay.
Yes. And we can actually turn that off, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
So I've got a pretty simple grid. I've got a row where I have my title. We see the title there. And then I have a grid view that's in row 1.
Okay.
And so that's my grid, and we can see that that is being contained within or that's my grid view, I should say, and we can see that that's being contained within the grid.
Yeah.
So if we recall, what we're trying to do is extend our content below the safe area to hint to people that that's available. So let's see how we can do that. And it's pretty simple. I've got a little style here that if I uncomment, it doesn't have a key, it only has a target type. So that means it's an implicit style, which will apply to all grid views within this page.
Since you only have one, it's easy.
It's pretty easy and straightforward. And I've applied a -27 margin to the bottom of the grid view.
And you knew 27 because that's that reliable number for the size of that margin that's applied.
Exactly. So let's run this up and see what effect this has.
Let's see, it was 48 on the top and bottom. No, it's 48 on the left and right and 27 on the top and bottom.
It's a good job it's predictable, huh?
Yeah, as long as you remember it properly.
Exactly. Okay, so straight away we can see that the grid view is now extended below into the green margin.
Yeah.
So now if I start moving my focus down, we can see that the control still does a great job of keeping the focused item into the safe content area.
So this isn't a property you set or anything. It automatically selects it and scrolls it into that area.
Yeah, great. We don't need to do anything else. Well, actually we do, because when we get to the bottom, unfortunately, we can see that the bottom item is extending into the safe area.
Yeah, and so this isn't necessarily a rule where we're like, your application's awful. This is more of a UI guidance where we say your application may not actually work properly for some users.
Yes, and they will consider it to be awful.
Yeah.
So let's look at how we address that. If we come back to Visual Studio, I'm going to comment out this particular style, and then I'm going to uncomment this style.
Now the style you're uncommenting now includes what you had before.
Yes.
It just adds one more thing.
One more thing with multiple lines.
One giant thing, yeah.
Yes. So here is our original property that sets the -27 margin that extends the grid view. And now we are supplying an additional template for the grid view. And this is always one of the more unfortunate aspects of styling to a certain extent, is that we need to replace the entire template. And so we have a lot of repeated code from the main template. The only thing that we're really doing at this point is we're actually finding the items presenter. So this is the container for all of the repeated items that appear in the grid view.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're changing the margin on there, which is ordinarily 0 across the board, to an additional 27.
Gotcha. So you're taking the grid view down, and you're taking the items and bringing it back up.
Bringing it back up.
Okay.
And that's effectively all we need to do. So if I run this...
Now, while that's loading, it's worth at least pointing out that whenever you retemplate at control, and then another version of UWP comes out, it actually is worth retemplating it again, because the template may actually change from one version to another, especially around things like accessibility.
Yes, and one of the key things there is that you may not notice a problem, but you will probably have lost features.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that catches you in the long run. Anyway, so we're back to our Extend UI sample, and this is the one with the modified template. I'm using the right trigger to navigate down. And now I'm on the bottom item, and we can see that it's actually fully in the window. So as I scroll back up, you can see it runs into the bottom.
Yeah.
If I come back down, now the focus is back in the center.
Nice. Well, that's straightforward.
That's pretty straightforward. Now, what we've demonstrated here are techniques with the grid view. If we come back and look in Visual Studio here, all I need to do is change my target type from grid view to list view here, and also on line 26 here for the control template to list view. And this same style and impact will work with a list view as well.
And now if you were to change the background color from green to white, it would suddenly feel like your application fills the screen, and you've made these changes to the grid view, so you actually do take advantage of it without
Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and run that one more time, and we can have the ooh-ah of a fully integrated app.
I'll give you that. Look at it.
So, obviously we've just extended this in the one direction.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't extended it above into the top because we have a title sitting there, and it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
Designers might want to incorporate some sort of gradual fade at the top there, so it makes it look like your items are tucking under the Extend UI sample there.
Yeah.
That's the sort of visual tricks that designers help us developers achieve. But fundamentally, what we've shown here is how you can extend your UI.
Perfect. Good job. Let's take a look at this slide that really talks about what you just showed us. And it's really around guidelines, not around rules. And it's about making your application accessible and usable by every user, regardless of the television that they're using. And so this first one shows when you make the selection and you're scrolling through that you want to be able to go all the way, you want to take advantage of that space, not only to hint at the user, but also so people with really nice televisions have a full experience. And then you can see at the bottom, the left and right, where you don't want to mistakenly allow it to select. And lucky for us, that really would only occur if we're using custom controls.
Yes.
And so it doesn't account for that for us. As long as we're using the controls right out of the toolbox, it does this for us right out of the box. It's nice.
Yes, it's very, very useful.
There are a lot of default behaviors inside a UWP app running an Xbox One. We talked about the scale factor is automatically at 200% because it's 10 feet away. Sometimes my app might want that not to be true, right? I want to control everything and not rely on that.
Yeah, if you've explicitly designed assets to be suitable for a 10-foot experience,
Yeah.
then you want to control it and design at 1080p as opposed to 540p.
That's right. That's right. Is that possible?
Yep. Let's have a look at the my Visual Studio again. So in this particular line here, what I'm doing is getting rid of the default experience of scaling up by 200%.
Okay, I see. And I see that it says try set, and that's because this API exists on other device families as well.
Yes.
And sometimes it won't allow you to make that change.
Yeah, there might be some circumstance that prevents
So
that.
if I'm writing an app that really relies on it, I'll go ahead and call this, but then test what the scale factor is.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's run this now on the Xbox and have a look at the difference in the UI. And so now we see the UI, we have dramatically more content being displayed.
Yeah.
And our title is much, much smaller. So
Everything is smaller. It's so tiny.
it is. It's half the size.
Nice. All right, so that's not the only default behavior we have in Xbox. We know of this 200% scale factor. We also have the TV safe area,
Yep.
and we can extend out multiple ways. We can use the page background. We can take our content if we want to pull that out with negative margins. But there's also an API to do it using that set desired bound mode.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so that's cool. So if you just want perfect control, right, and you don't want to have any of those margins, you can do that too as well. But buyer beware, you're now responsible for the user's experience. And then this idea of where the cursor was moving around, you showed us how to turn that off and turn that on, and pointed out that we can do it at the global level or at the individual element level.
Absolutely.
So that is all of the default behavior. Now there is kind of another caveat here we should talk to developers about, and specifically it's around colors.
That's right. So we've mentioned how we have TV safe area.
Right? Not all TVs are created equally.
We also have a similar challenge with TV safe colors.
Okay.
So there's a phenomena where TVs, or many TVs, are not able to display a differentiation between colors at the low end of the register and at the high end of the register.
Yeah, so this graphic that we're looking at here shows all the way from 0 to 255. That's the full range of RGB. And here at the upper of that 0 to 15, and then way down at the lower, that 236 to 255, those are the extreme edges you're talking about.
Yes. And so the challenge that they have is that anything that's in 0 to 15 will appear to be the same color.
Oh, okay.
And anything that's in 236 to 255.
All right, so I am writing some applications that do use a lot of gradients. What are some of the strategies you'd recommend?
Well, so we have the existing one, which is if you don't do anything, then your low range and your high range colors are just going to be indistinguishable.
Yeah.
So, first and foremost, you can leave it alone if it's not a problem.
Okay, so that's just leave it alone. You may never even notice.
Yep.
Got it.
Your next one is a strategy called clamping. And the idea there is that you turn around and you scan all your colors, and you look to see if you've got any of the RGB elements in the 0 to 15 range. If so, you set them all to 16.
Now, basically, this is what is happening to my app when it goes.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
So what it's going to do, though, is make those colors consistent across all your devices.
Yeah, and I can see by the little thumbnail at the top there that basically could make my application look sort of washed out.
Yeah, it's basically going to flatten out and lose some contrast.
All right, and then there's one more option.
So the other one is then turning around and looking at the range of colors that you have and then collapsing that range down so it fits within the 16 to 235.
All right, well, that makes it a little more clear to us on what we need to do, especially for apps that care about it. What are the visual differences when your UWP app is running on Xbox One? We talked about the TV safe area, that margin around that's 48 by 48 on each side and 27 on the top and the bottom. We also talked a little bit about the scaling and how you automatically get this 200% scaling to make your app look great at a 10-foot distance, but also you have the ability to turn that off if for whatever reason you don't want it. And we also talked about that cursor and how you can leave it by default, you'll get it on. That way, applications written for a desktop will automatically work in some way, but maybe your application can be optimized for Xbox. Then you can turn it off globally or on the individual item. And then we talked about this crazy thing around colors. And it's worth pointing out that at E3, they announced the new Xbox coming out.
Yes.
And they're addressing this color in the next version of the Xbox to try and make it better and easier for developers.
Yep.
Pretty cool stuff. That's this session, and we'll see you again.